everybody. This is Stefani Rupert. Thank you for tuning in to the Naked Humanity podcast, where we take the deepest look possible at what it means to be human. Today's episode number 36X, and I am going to be talking about academic publishing. Seriously, I'm going to be talking about academic publishing. In this brief episode, I will be discussing what I see are the massive injustices that exist because of the academic publishing model. It actually infuriates me. So this will be quite a fiery podcast, and I think pretty interesting about what the world needs. Right. So before we get into it, I have a winner to announce for our podcast drawing. His name is Don Robbins. He got a free book. It was one of these. You know how to enter. I won't elaborate on it. I won't bore you with the details. All you got to do is take a screenshot of your review and email it to Stephanie@nakedhumanity.org. That's it. That's all you got to do. And thank you so much for tuning in. This is an episode about academic publishing. Now, why do I want to talk about academic publishing? Because I hate it. I hate it. I hate academic publishing. It needs to die. Now, I happen to not be the only person who feels this way. The University of California system, which happens to be the largest university system in the United States, it accounts for 10% of all the research conducted at universities in the United States, which is massive. They actually, I think earlier this year, broke with Elsevier, which I believe that Americans pronounce Elsevier, which is the biggest publisher of academic journals in the United States. Recently broke with them because they would not make journal articles open access, which means available to everybody. So the University of California is outraged with me. Why do we want open access? So currently, journals are the way that academics talk about what they do, right? Academics can also write books, but it takes a longer time, and they're always written for academic audiences. And so are the articles, right? And in order to access these, you need to pay for it. Now, if you want to read one article, say you're just somebody who's not affiliated with the university, you want to read one article, you're going to pay at minimum $30, $35 for it, maximum $60, $70, $80 just to read this one article. If you want to subscribe to a journal for a year, you can pay several hundred. And that's just one journal. And there are so many journals out there in the world today. Open access would get rid of this paywall, right? Because it is so inimical to public education to prevent people from being able to access the writing that's being done in the academy. And the thing is, academics are under so much pressure to publish a lot and to teach a lot and to perform all these bureaucratic duties, administrative duties. They are so stressed out and overworked and underpaid, and they have to produce articles that are up to academic publishing standards, which, by the way, are ridiculous. They have to, and of course I understand that they need to be academically rigorous and intellectually rigorous, and we want to have a solid body of work and all that sort of stuff. And it's all very important, but it can take I could sit down and work on an academic article full time for a month and probably get it done. I can do it shorter if it's on a topic I already know, already have research on. And of course, most academics do have an ongoing body of research that they're constantly working with. But my point is, it's very laborious work to be an academic, and it's very hard. And so academics have very little time to make an effort to get outside of the academy and also publish in outlets for public consumption, right? It's totally outside their career. It's not advantageous to their career at all. Universities hardly care whether people write blogs. Usually, if you're quite successful, then they will really care and they'll want you. But generally speaking, they're not huge proponents of public outreach. And so academics aren't reaching beyond what we call the paywall, and then people on the other side of the paywall just cannot access work being done in the academy. Individuals, as I mentioned, have to pay per article or per subscription. And you can also, of course, as an institution, pay per article or per subscription, which is what people do. And this is how people get access to articles. And it's part of the reason that I haven't graduated from Oxford yet, is because once I finish here, I will no longer have access to the Oxford University library system. And I will no longer have access to the literally thousands of journals that I currently use to do things like write my books. I don't know what I'm going to do when I finish here at Oxford. I really don't. I have no idea, because it pays for my access, but the amount that it pays is not small. And it's hard to find statistics on this sort of thing, but I found today the University of California annually pays that system $11.2 million to Elsevier in order to have access to the many journals that it stewards. Now, of course, it costs a lot of money to produce these kinds of journal articles on such a large scale, but Elsevier is posting profits in the billions. And I think it's in the billions. It might be in the millions. It's 30% above their revenue. They're making tons of money. And so there's a big question of whether this is a profit-driven enterprise or whether it is at all motivated, whether it is at all motivated by the desire to help make society better and produce really good scholarship, So we also find that people in developing countries and institutions in developing countries are hugely disadvantaged by this system, because their currencies aren't worth as much money. So even if they happen to be a high-ranking university in a certain country that has a low-value currency, they will not have enough money in order to subscribe to X, Y, and Z journals. So they're really quite stuck. Now, academics who really care about people being able to access their journals, their articles, can pay to make their personal articles open access. So you basically pay Elsevier or whatever other publishing company to let your article be open to the public. Now, I recently published an article in Method and Theory in the Study of Religion, and I think it was going to cost me $2,500 to make it open access. I seem to remember that number, and that makes sense because normally it falls in the range of what I was looking at earlier today. PLOS One, which is one of the most prominent open access journals in the world today, it's trying to change the industry, still will charge academics $1,600 to publish their paper open access, and other groups or other journals will charge up to $5,000. So you are still facing a cost of publishing your article. Or you can have it behind the paywall and nobody will read it, and certainly not anybody from the public. Now, this is all a massive problem because this is how research is conducted, right? This is how academics talk to each other, for better or for worse. I happen to think it's for worse, but this is how academics talk to each other. And if you're really privileging the access of people at elite institutions, you're continuing to give them a greater advantage than people who aren't at elite institutions, right? And you can the difference is massive. You could access maybe thousands or millions. I can access millions of articles from the Oxford database, but how many would I be able to access from a university in a developing country? As I mentioned, a country that has a low value currency, the numbers drop dramatically. And then your research is stymied because you don't have access to the articles. You do have the option of contacting the original author and asking for a PDF, but a typical article will have at least 50 citations in it. So you need to do that 50 times, and that's massively time consuming. And you don't even know which articles you're going to need for your research in your paper, and so you're probably going to have to ask for 100. It's all very complicated. So research is not advancing the way that it could be, and people are not being able to sort of climb the ladder because they're stuck behind a paywall at lower rung institutions. And then, of course, society as a whole is suffering because we have completely bifurcated public and academic discourses. I think this paywall is a part of the reason that academic discourse has become so entrenched in itself, and we use words that people in public discourse have never even heard of. You've invented the words and the terms, and you refer to obscure authors and use really long and convoluted sentences in this like slightly postmodern way that is intentionally kind of obscure because you're trying to somehow like gesture towards the obscurity of text. Or you don't write in complete sentences because you're trying to demonstrate that complete sentences are hegemonic, or you need to deconstruct what they call the logos, like the linears, right? This is another term from the academy that people throw around all the time, the humanities, the logos, or carnophilagocentrism, right? There's all these terms that we use to talk about our culture in the academy that we don't use anywhere else. And you can, but then it's just tricky because the languages don't exist in both of those worlds. And of course, the science is all very complicated, but that's unfortunately how science is and will be for the foreseeable future. But we have these very bifurcated discourses, and the public is not privy to these academic words, and the academics see no reason to try to appeal to the public. They only have to appeal to each other. And in fact, that's how they get jobs and that's how they get paid. And so the more obscure or smart they can seem to one another, the better off they'll be, the better their reputation will be. And so they're almost better served by not using language that is accessible to the public. But if the public had any sort of say and or ability to engage in these discourses, then there may be some kind of melting, or at least a transgressing of this boundary, right? Then the public may actually be able to use this language, to reflect on this language. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to be reading these academic journals. I'm just saying if they want to, And then can have some kind of meaningful discourse. I'm not saying that academic discourse needs to be dumbed down, but I do think that it needs to be less self-congratulatory and self-reflexive and, in a way, self-gratifying and self-stressful. Like, I'm not saying that academics necessarily enjoy this, but it's just wrapped up in itself and not at all engaged in the wider world. And access to these scientific articles could be really big. There are individuals in the world, in developing countries, who are brilliant and could have really innovative ideas, but they have a hard time publishing, or they have a hard time getting access to the articles they need in order to write something to publish. And what's more, in the States and other countries, of course, but for example, in the States, the public actually pays for a significant portion of research that is conducted at universities, because universities apply for grants, which are given often, though not always, and now decreasingly, because they've decreased a lot of funding in the current administration, apply for funding through grants through the federal government. So the public, in a sense, funds research, but then has to pay for it again to read the results of that research. Now, I understand, I think open markets are very important and very helpful for a lot of reasons. And I mean open markets in terms of like capitalistic markets. There is legitimacy to the free hand, to Adam Smith's free hand. I really do think there is. But I also, I don't think that academic journals should be closed off in this way. I think that something like radically needs to change. I think everything needs to be open access. I love what the University of California just did. I think that that's a bold step in the right direction. It's really, really terrible for society and terrible for people who want to advance and just learn, and what harm would come to the academic publishing industry, making things open access. Even if profits decreased by 30%, they would still be fine. So maybe I'll found a nonprofit or something, find a way to help get voices out there. And of course, I talk about this on the podcast all the time, but I am personally very invested in breaking down the barriers between the academy and the public, because I think it's so important. There's so much great dialogue going on both sides, and people in the academy can learn from the public too. Because ideas are ideas, and people can have good ones despite how much they've read. And so I think it's really important to break down these barriers. And I really want to see that. I really want to see that change, and I want to, I want to see education become more open to people and the ability to do research. I think more open to people, and also for academic journals to be less closed to people who do research outside of traditional institutional bounds, because I think that's really important as well. Help people publish who aren't professors but still have really good ideas. Yeah, I think that's really important. So those are just some things to reflect on. If you happen to be an academic, I'm sure you know everything I'm talking about. If you have ideas about any of this, I'd love to hear it. But I really wanted to talk about this because in this podcast, something we're trying to do is not just get to the heart of who we are as a species, but also what we need to leverage what we know about ourselves as a species and transform our lives and our communities for the better. And this, I think, getting rid of this bifurcation between academia and everybody else, I think could be really, really significant for our progress. Should we make it? So anyway, this has been episode number 36X of the Naked Humanity podcast. My name is Stefani Ruper. You know that. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Stefani Ruper. Please do get at me. I always, always, always love it when you do. You can also always email me at nakedhumanity.org, Stefani at nakedhumanity.org, or the contact form at stefaniruper.com, all that sort of stuff. Please do be in touch. Thank you so much. I will talk to you next week.